guys, welcome back to the Every Plant Story podcast. My name is Shane. I'm here with co-host Sam. Sam, how you doing?
Hello, great. How about you?
It's been a good day. We're here on a very special day because we have a very special guest.
Yes.
For those of you who are new to the podcast, the Every Plant Story podcast is here to share more plant stories. And as I've said before, some of those plant stories come from people in the plant community, plant people. And some of it also comes from the people who are best at it, professional growers. That all being said, without further ado, we have a very special professional grower with us today, Madge, who runs a multi-location wholesale foliage business here in Central Florida. And it's always been kind of my goal, Sam, I know we've talked about it a bunch, but the people who have had decades of growing experience.
Right.
I mean, I'm only 26 years old. I'm the first person to admit I don't know everything. And I think there's a lot we can learn from people like Madge. So without further ado, welcome Madge to the show.
Hello, Madge.
Hey, Madge, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. It's nice to see you.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you, Sam.
Absolutely.
Shane, always pleasure.
Yeah, it's really cool. We got to get you over to this side of town. I know we're a little bit further away from your side of the neck of the woods in Central Florida. But how has this year been for you so far? How are you doing?
It's been a wonderfully chaotic, busy year so far. We're only 2 months into it, but it's been a complete continuation of last year for sure. There's been no break at all because of the winter, the holidays, nothing. It is still just full speed ahead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And speaking of that, I mean, we can get to that. It's been rough keeping up with having enough plants for the people who want plants. But how did you first get into plants? I don't want to skip past that too quickly. What first got you interested?
It has literally been a lifelong incident. One of my very first memories was about plants. I was probably, according to the story from my mom, about 2, and I was going to help her garden around the flower beds.
Right.
So I proceeded to pull all the flowers off of the geraniums to make her a bouquet. So you can imagine my mother's shock and delight when her 2-year-old presented her with a bouquet of flowers and the flower beds were empty.
That's fantastic. So obviously that flowering plants, it sounds like you got an early start. When did you start getting into the house plants, or was that the start did you start with gardening, or how was that evolution for you?
It was a little bit of everything. I'm one of the last few true natives. I was born and raised here. So for the last 56 years, I have enjoyed everything there is to do with agriculture in Central Florida. From the beautiful orange trees in our backyard, where our swing sets were, swinging from sunup till sundown, eating oranges to the point that you had big red acid blisters around your mouth. And,
yeah, that's true.
And my mother loved gardening. We had roses, obviously our infamous geranium beds, and shrubs. She hand-selected little bushes, and we grew our own hedges.
Wow.
It's literally been a lifelong thing, and I think now saying it all out loud, I guess it came from her. We were the first house in our neighborhood that had our very own homemade greenhouse. It was about a 10-foot by 10-foot building.
Wow.
And so when winter was approaching, all of her favorite little plants were moved in there.
Right.
And I used to help her water them and take care of them until it was warm enough for everyone to come back out again.
That's awesome. That's cool. So you said from mom, right? What you had a tiny greenhouse. Do you have any memories of first propagating plants there, or like where was the transition to house plants?
Well, I guess that actually came a little later on. It was my senior year in high school. There was this new program being offered called DECA.
Okay.
So in your senior year of high school, I had my very first official paycheck job.
Okay.
And that was at a nursery in Plymouth.
Okay.
And from start, they were specializing in bedding plants. So everything from operating the cedar machine, you know, the little tiny 288 cell plug trays, and then from post-graduation was my first job at I guess what we would now call a regular greenhouse.
Okay.
So everything from cutting, sticking, plug transfers, you know, from start to finish until we packed them up, put them in a box, loaded them up on a semi, and out they went. And from there, it has just been a nonstop love affair with plants, every plant.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, it goes without saying, but your greenhouse has always been one of the highest quality, probably the highest quality in Apopka. And you produce some of the best plants, but I mean, that's obviously a testament to all the lessons you've learned throughout the time. Did you go to school for botany or what?
No,
Really?
Absolutely not. Everything was basically just, you grew up in it. So it was all the benefit of parents, the knowledge passed down. Now, my husband, he actually did train professionally for this. I always tell everyone that he's our scientist and chemist. That's where the detail work
Right.
Of course.
comes from.
Right.
But I literally started at the bottom, filling pots.
Right.
The whole 9 yards.
Learn each
So,
step one at
yeah,
a time. Yeah, it's awesome.
And yeah, I think that people don't, it kind of goes without saying, but I don't think people in general realize how much of the same tasks greenhouse does a lot.
Right, right.
Everyone kind of thinks it's a magical place, and by all means, especially when stuff's getting ready to go out the door, the feeling of magic kind of comes back around you, and you have that like, yeah, I'm proud of this thing, I grew it.
It is, and it sounds a little, I guess you might say hippie-ish, but it is true. It's that whole hands-on nurturing magic that happens.
Right.
that you can take this seed, plant it, grow it, and turn it into
Fruit.
exactly
Yeah, or whatever.
That was always my favorite part of the
ornamental
greenhouse.
products. It's and it is. We have a lot of times folks who just think that, oh well, you just go down to your big box store and you get a pot and you put some soil in it and you stick a plant in here and boom. No, boom takes a little longer than that.
I wish it was boom.
Same.
We probably would have a lot more plants to share with the people who want them if it worked that way.
And I think that's another thing that this plant shortage that we're having, that's where it comes from. One of the plants that we grow are the Dutch Anthuriums. And they're brought in from Holland as a little plug liner. So from the moment they're unboxed and put in the soil, it is 1 year
Wow.
until that plant is finished and ready to be sold.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
insane.
I mean, growing takes time and patience. I mean, without a doubt. I mean, we can get into a little bit of where the market is at too. When obviously you said you didn't go to school, meeting your husband, obviously he brought some things to the table too. When was kind of the start to what now is the business that you run? When did you kind of branch out into making your own?
I think in 1985 is when the big shift happened. His parents started the greenhouse in 1964.
Wow.
And then in 1983, my sister-in-law came on board. And then in 84, Paul came full-time on board. And then I joined the crew in 85.
Wow.
So from the time that Dad had it until Paul and his sister took over, about 85. And that's when the huge, shift occurred, that we expanded and made it much larger.
I was going to say, how big was it when you started way back then compared to what you're doing now?
Well, the first location was 6 greenhouses, 6 hoop houses.
So what, a quarter of an acre, maybe?
Maybe.
Yeah.
And then 6 more hoop houses were added to that location. And then in the 70s, they acquired the second location. That was another 13 acres, probably. That was another one that started off as 6 hoop houses. And since then, that property has had the biggest expansion. They added on 18 more Dutch glass houses.
Oh, wow.
So it was a huge jump.
Yeah.
Huge jump.
That's awesome.
And then in the early 90s, we acquired the third location. So that's another 8 houses.
Incredible. Now, what is it like? Do you use the different, this isn't in our notes, but do you use the different locations to grow different things? Is there, we're new, obviously some of the things we've talked about in the podcast the past couple weeks has been just the fact that we're now operating in 2 different locations. Obviously you have teams split up on different locations. Have there been things, challenges and positives? Is it easier to grow certain things at different locations?
It is. And the biggest key that I could even offer, even advice for you, the biggest trick to what we do is you have to grow what grows in your area. And that's a very hard lesson for folks to learn. Everyone loves, the cyclamens and the other seasonal crops. The problem is we live in Central Florida. And you need to remember that when it's 95 degrees in the middle of August, cyclamens don't like that.
Especially when your greenhouse is 10 degrees warmer than it is outside.
Exactly. Right. And every fan on the property is going 100 miles an hour.
Exactly.
And you can only just cool so much.
Yeah.
I mean, unless you really want to throw in a huge investment, which at your age would be, a valid option to invest in coolers and things like that. But, the key is to grow what grows in your area.
And that does change from greenhouse to greenhouse too, because you have different structures and the roof is a different height. And you're
right. Dutch glass houses are not the same as double layer poly houses by any means. We do have certain areas which do have cool wet pads. As I like to refer to those as our redneck air conditioning system.
Yeah, that's pretty much what it does.
So other than that, you need to remember we're in Central Florida and you need to grow what grows in your area.
And vice versa for the listeners too. I mean, that also... it goes without saying, but yeah, it's going to be harder to maintain high variegation on a plant if you're living in Seattle and have overcast for, months and months at a time. So it definitely does impact you. Now, the cool thing is, and I got to show you some of the technology we're working on and stuff too, is that technology is starting to catch up and help, at least in the consumer side, in the customer side. You can get a grow light now. Those used to be things you remember back in the day. You'd had to wire up entire new circuitry and the whole, the whole nine. Now it's just a LED panel you can plug into your wall. So there are options out there, but if you don't have the light, you're probably gonna need to find a way to make it up. And we had the same. We learned a very hard lesson. That's the gotcha question of this whole thing is at the end. We'll to ask you to share your most embarrassing plant story, because I just think it's really important, because everyone thinks that because, especially somebody like you, I mean, me, I almost get an excuse because I'm a professional grower, but I'm 26, so you can cut me some slack. But we've all made those mistakes, and that's the way you learn.
Those hard lessons,
but we learned that hard the first year we did Gabriella, direct to consumer online, is we tried to grow some oxalis, and that was the same. That was the same thing. It was beautiful
the
until
bane of our existence.
Until the end of March, and then they don't want anything over 88 degrees, and there you go, just like a light switch.
Come in the next day, the whole bench. You're like, oh well, there it goes. I guess we're tossing that in the garbage.
Yeah, and of course they'll retreat down beneath the soil, but it doesn't. Right. Yeah, you can't sell it at that point. So
and then the other thing is that I try to let as many of our end consumers know the biggest benefit that you have is being able to actually reach your sales staff, your local grower. If you have questions, that knowledge is, so important. And that's one of the things that I love most about working with Gabriella is, anybody can, go online, open up a shop and, sell plants, but that's only half the work. It's the customer service, it's the grower knowledge, it's all of that. And that's not to say, with our earlier conversation about growing what grows best in your area, you can grow our beautiful tropical plants all over the country. So I hope that didn't come out the right way.
Of course, but it's not going to be exactly the same. They're not going to put out the same number of leaves,
And you need to know what season are you in? What's the light placement? What's the fertilizer rate? How you can successfully maintain your plant over this winter holiday and still have them ready to go this spring once it warms up and the sun is out again, and she'll just continue growing. And that's stuff that you can't just find anywhere.
And something that's always made plants, I feel like, a part of my life is there's a big part of, as someone especially who suffers from anxiety and stuff, when you have those kind of moments where you don't have something to work on, if you have something to go put your hands at, I find myself doing it even with Gabriella, if I'm at home and Miriam's gone, my wife's gone, and I don't know what to do, instead of sitting around doing nothing, it's fun to just go have something to invest in, something to care about, something to work on. Bit. Yeah, exactly. It's very relaxing. So I really enjoyed in that sense, without a doubt. And it's been, that it's a real passion when that's the case. When you have free time and you find yourself just back doing it with the plants, you got a problem, or that you're, however you want to view that,
or a passion, problem or passion.
It's oftentimes they come hand in hand, we'll see about that. That's a perfect segue to my next question for you, Madge. What do you find the most rewarding in being a grower?
That's a really big answer there. It's everything. Like I say, I don't know if it's the whole process from start to finish. There's something rewarding on a weekend when it's quiet, the other employees aren't there, it's just you and my trusty sidekick Jake, my assistant grower. He's our cat. We love to walk through the greenhouses in the quiet and just, from the very first little sprouts emerging from the soil, to that bed full of beautiful plants that I can call Shane and let him know they're ready to go.
That's awesome.
So it's the whole thing. It's the quiet, it's the fresh air, the clean fresh air, the warmth.
Yeah.
No dry skin because you got 100% humidity anywhere you go.
And it's a bit of personal pride,
100%.
And then there's the other, half of my job and what I do is not just a grower, but as the salesperson.
Mm-hmm.
Being able to do what I do best because I've seen them grow from start to finish.
Yeah. There's nobody better to be able to offer, the tips and tricks than the person who's super experienced growing them. And that's always been kind of my passion about connecting more growers to the people who want these answers. Because, there are plenty of content creators, and that's not even to say anything bad about content creators out there, but I've learned a lot from you, from touring your facilities, Madge. And I try to do that with anyone that will share the information with me, because I also realize there's a lot I can learn, and I'm very, very young. Speaking of cooling pads, and she said it was a good investment. That is already in the plan for the Brooks green.
Nice.
In the Brooks greenhouses.
Yes.
Yeah. So I don't know if I've told you yet, but we're building additional greenhouses on my wife and I's property, just 5 driveways around. And those will have cooling pads. So we can start growing some of the things that become challenging to grow in the summer, because we never really had a way to keep temperatures reasonable like that. So it'll be
wonderful news.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Super cool.
It'll be we'll see how long it takes to actually get built. I've learned to set my expectations low, because we've now
make the runway long.
Yeah, we've now, whether it was coming here and becoming 2 locations, or when we built the HQ building there, everyone always tells you, 6 weeks. Just go ahead and tell yourself 18 weeks, so you're
6
not
weeks, every 6 weeks.
Yeah, exactly. So just go ahead and tell yourself 3 times whatever they tell you the timeline is, so that you're less disappointed than you otherwise would be. That being said, you said that one of your favorite, I feel like Madge and I are just connected so deep on the whole being there on the weekend when no one else is there.
Yeah.
I mean, I love to show up at 4:30, when everyone else is scooted out of there. Not because I love our team, but because there is something.
There's a really nice, peaceful feeling.
And there's also like a weird correlation to, like, at least for me, and maybe I just overthink. I mean, I overthink everything, but it's also observing growth in the sense of plants can make it a lot easier to think through and talk about and have perspectives on your growth as a person, the growth as a team. It's a big window into looking at, in my mind, the world in a much more graceful and helpful frame of mind.
There's a lot of lessons to be learned.
Yeah. Right. And that's one of the things, even, training, over all these years, it is a team in every sense of the word, from your delivery driver to the people who are filling the pots, to the people who are cutting the vines and sticking them, to the people who are packing up when it's 100+ degrees, you're sopping wet at the end of the day, you're hot, tired,
dirty,
exactly. And
2 showers isn't enough.
But it takes all of you together, everybody on the same page, to make it flawless. And I just view, the people that I am blessed to work with, I never refer to them as employees. They are your family. And when you stop and think about it, you're there from 7 o'clock in the morning till 4, at least 4 plus in the afternoon. When you map it out, you spend more of your time with them than you do at home. Oh, well, that's not the case. Well, okay.
Do the math.
Get off
Run the
work,
numbers again.
You go home, you get showered up, you have dinner, you maybe watch a couple of Netflix, and the next thing you know, you're asleep.
Back at work.
And you're asleep until you get up tomorrow morning and you do it all again. So when you think about waking time, and then that is the most important thing, and you need to let them know that they are appreciated. You do. I see what you're doing over there. I'm taking notes of that. I see you, busting it. Because
if those pots don't get filled and the vines don't get cut, and then the delivery truck doesn't show, every piece is important.
So everyone has to be working together to make it happen. And there's no other way. And when you are blessed to find those, those people who do that, that just makes my job. I'm probably one of the happiest people around.
Right.
I had the best people to work with, the best job in the world, and I wouldn't trade it for anything.
It's so cool to hear that, because it's like you said, Shane, you and Madge are connected. I've seen over the past couple months, that's been a very big passion of Shane's, driving home that point to our team, that it is, every piece of the puzzle has to be there for it to be perfect to get that plant to the customer. And then that's part of the personal pride too, that the whole team puts it in, and then we get my plant arrived perfect. Look at this, and then everybody had a piece in that, you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Yeah, and it's one of the reasons we pushed really early on to do the packed by cards with the signatures of who was involved in the process, and something we want to expand on as we roll out the Every Plant Has a Story nursery stakes and that whole initiative later this year. All that is to, and it's always been on my heart to try to relay as much as possible, especially when we talk about what we do is direct to consumer, so we have the ability to tell the story direct to the endpoint and to try to share as much as possible that, there was probably, 9 people that had to do with an average order between the person who planted it, the person who watered it, the person who, did spraying or other, trimming, those types of things, then down to the person brings it over to shipping, shipper has to put it in a box, over and over and over again. None of those tasks. And if any single part of it starts to break down, it has ripple effects. If, me sending the newsletter email has some misinformation, our customer care team answering emails is going to have a lot more clarifying questions because of something that I rushed and said before it needed to be. And in the same way, inventory sending or saying a plant is ready to ship that isn't, adds another email to customer service if it doesn't make it there. So all of our teams interact with each other's workload. And the last thing I think on the teamwork thing, and I think, Madge, you could even speak to this, that is particularly, obviously our whole company is one team, but the teamwork thing is even more of a necessity when it comes to the greenhouse, because it is 100 degrees and you got to have the family that can look out for one another and go, hey, you're not, we're all here to plant more plants, but you look like you're going to pass out. You need to,
drink some water.
Yeah, you need to go
sit in the shade.
Exactly.
And to be able to pick somebody up when they, when they do fall, not physically, but
hopefully.
Well, yeah, but now I must have to admit, one time that was me. We had some paint. We had to paint the roofs over at one of the locations. So when that happens, you have to turn the fans off.
Right.
Because you don't want overspray and all of that. And one time it just was a little too warm, and I literally was down. So you do that. You keep an eye on everyone. Like I said, when you spend that many hours a day with each other, you do get to know them. You do care.
Right.
You are personally involved, and I used to, I guess, be a little sad about reaching this age of maturity, but I also over the last year have grown to embrace it. So I guess I am now the official mother hen. So if you start looking a little squirrely, you're going to the break room, you're going to sit down, you're going to get something to drink, a few minutes in the AC.
Oh yeah.
I have my phone set to the weather alert, so if it gets looking a little stormy or a little scary out there in the greenhouse, we'll all head back into the metal warehouse. We'll make trays. We'll do something else until it's safe.
I hate to cut her off, but I swear to God, I'm just seeing myself 30 years in the future, because I am known in our team for being Mr. Weatherman and the same thing. Yeah. Right. I mean, these are the things that I think this has been such a cool podcast, because these are the things that growers do without even thinking about it. Even in the time I didn't work at the greenhouse, when you first came on way back when we first were doing wholesale, I had weather alerts. We didn't have the weather station and the stuff we do now inside the greenhouse and stuff, but you keep your ear to the ground to so much and you do so many little things that even sometimes the team doesn't even realize, has to happen. But there's so many little things like that. And, I think that's been a lot of our goals too, is how do you get more of those things either automated or to a way that they could be operated or done by somebody with training. Because a lot of those pieces of equipment from a pop gun stuff, they don't come with even the tray stapler. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, it didn't exactly come with a how to staple a tray from it. It's just kind of assumed that if you have the big floor stapler, you know what to do with it.
You know what you're doing.
Right. But if you're going to go to multiple locations and you now need to make a piece of paper that says, here's how you use it, here's how you reload it, you got to make that from scratch because that's not even out there.
Right.
So it's been a really interesting thing to see all this stuff that I do, and that she's like, yeah, you just do this because you're a girl. I'm like, okay, good. I'm not just crazy, because I thought I was pretty crazy for having all the weather alerts on my phone.
No, just one of my personal beliefs is we're not just stewards of the land. We're stewards of each other.
Mm-hmm.
And it's only when you all work together as a team that it works smoothly. Now, believe me, there are days, no matter how well you all tried, there are days when, you're just a grumpy Gus for whatever reason.
Things don't go as planned.
Exactly. And that's just going to be a really good day for you to walk the greenhouses and take inventory by yourself.
Exactly.
Or something like that. But for the most part, it's one big happy family in every sense of the word. And I love being an educator and teacher for the next generation. And every bit of knowledge that I've acquired, I'm always happy to pass it along and do whatever I can to help get the next generation of young people into growing, whether it's agriculture for food or plants or cattle.
There's a lot of agriculture that isn't house plants. That's equally as needed. And I think that's something that I have said before to the team too, is just like, even the principles you're learning in whether you were working on a farm growing vegetables and you had house plants, there are lessons you can kind of apply to both, and vice versa too. If you grew a bunch, our team grows a bunch of house plants, but these are the same principle. Your tomato plant still needs light, water, nutrients. It's the same story, and it's just learning more and more of the specifics on how to best care for specifics, but it's all basic biology still. And it's cool to see people who have been interns for my dad's business in the past and things, go on, and like you're saying, it may go into a different portion of agriculture, but those lessons are still very real.
And even the lessons outside of, like you were saying, those life lessons you can get from growing, you can take those people that work in the greenhouse and you can take those lessons that you learn from, like you're saying, being patient with each other in the greenhouse, working together to beat the heat and get the stuff done. You can take those outside of just the greenhouse context and apply them to the wider scope of your life and growth and those types of things. And that's what I feel like coming in to help Shane from, years back when we were doing the wholesale business. I was outside of the plant business or the industry, you know what I mean? And all those lessons, it's so cool to see that, for me.
Right. And basically, like what we've been, talking about this whole time, there are at least a handful of things that I can think of right off the top of my head that would apply the same way. Are we not speaking about what teachers do every day?
Right.
Those wonderful school teachers, your nurses.
Right.
Yeah.
That same nurturing,
being willing to take what you learned from the day before and figure out how to get it to the next.
So it's it all is connected.
Yeah.
Always growing more.
Right.
Absolutely.
100%. What another question for you? What does a day in the life look like for you? Obviously, you just kind of mentioned it earlier. Wake up, go do plant things, go home. wake up, do it again. But what do you?
Well, the typical day, what the optimum day would be.
Of course, the plan versus reality
perfect
is sometimes different.
The first half of my day is usually in the greenhouses. First thing, you've got plants that you're packing, orders that need to be filled, making sure that, everybody has their designated tasks for the day. I walk the benches, who needs fertilizing, what plants, what crops is being shifted from this building to the finishing building. Friday morning, I was out closing shade curtains. Mm-hmm. So the first half of the day is greenhouse. After lunch, then I'm in the office where I put on my salesman cap. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And get to everything you knew the entire morning while you were having fun.
Right.
And
you needed to do.
In the back of your mind.
Yeah, in the back of your
Exactly.
mind, you're like, I still didn't respond to Jeff.
Gotta make these phone calls.
Yeah, I need to remember. Yeah, I need to call him and let him know that those are ready. Or more than likely, here in the last year, that phone call has been around. Gee, I know that we were hoping to have these ready to go, but it's been a unusually cool and cloudy, rainy winter for us.
It has.
And the plants are running, around 3 to 4 weeks behind. And then a lot of times it's, they want to pre-book or want to order, and I'm sorry, there's just not enough plants to go around,
Right.
and trying to get people to understand why there's not enough plants to go around.
Yeah, and that's been something I've addressed countless times in like live streams and stuff. It's part of the thing that makes me happiest out of everything I do at Gabriella is just like the overall knowing that we're doing our part to try to encourage the next generation of growers, because there's been a huge drop off of people who had similar stories to you, but whose children don't have as much interest in doing it. There's been, obviously in Central Florida, not to get too into the weeds, but there's been a lot of new roads and things that is also, what do they call that? Eminent domain, seized some of the properties, but that made it hard if it took half your property. And it's also made property values go up because now you're a closer drive to Disney. So there's a tons of compounding factors that the number of growers that there used to be is dwindling. And that was way before the plant market kind of upticked. But since you kind of tapped on the industry and how things have changed, obviously there's always been, I've grown up in it. I was in a greenhouse when I was in diapers. There's always the spring rush, fall off of sales towards the end, the Q4, basically you just don't have anything and you hope you earned enough money in the front half of the year to pay for all your supplies going into next year.
That was the usual routine.
Right. How has that changed in the last 2 years? Because obviously a lot of people got into the plant market during COVID, but you and I have been talking since far before COVID on running out of supply.
And actually, when I've been asked this before, I describe it as it was a perfect storm. It actually started as far back as Hurricane Irma.
Mm-hmm. You're right, 100%.
It was the week before Hurricane Irma hit us. And there was a mad dash. Everyone wanted to hurry up, get their orders in, get their plants in, and get them safely to them before Hurricane Irma hit. Because,
out of the state of Florida.
Because, oh my gosh, what if the greenhouses get blown away? Then we're not going to have any plants. So quick, everybody, hurry up and order everything you want. Then Friday night, Hurricane Irma did hit us. Luckily, we had very little damage, very little. We were so blessed. So that was Friday. So 9 days, no electricity. That was a boatload of fun, I tell you.
Sure.
Especially when you need electricity to run your well to water the plants.
That made life very interesting. So out comes some creative work, and we need to get electricity to this well because everything else, no air conditioning, no
Everybody
nothing,
has
but
an
we have
old
to
like
have
60s
water.
Buick engine that's hooked up to some crazy belt, you know.
Yeah, but you're not going to do anything without water. So that was our top priority. Make sure that the water is running. So that was day 12 was our, not the Monday right after, but the following Monday. Electricity was back on. Customers found out we weren't blown away. So then it was a mad scramble for those who did sustain quite a bit of damage.
Right.
They needed plants. They needed to get plants back into their greenhouses like pronto. And we have not caught up since.
Yeah.
And the other thing I think that's worth pointing out in Irma too, and I'd have to pull it up, but you also had it, and this is typically a Florida thing. I don't know what the percentages are, but a chunk, let's just call it 50-50. It's probably not, but some houseplants in the state of Florida are grown in the Central Florida region. Some are grown in South Florida, either slightly north of Miami or south of Miami in the Homestead area. And most of the time, hurricane season, or especially hurricane by hurricane, only really targets or comes into contact with one of those two. Irma did that whole let's skate across the bottom of the state first and then yank, northwards. So a lot of the damages that were some of the worse off were some of the stuff down there too.
Right.
And
so there was a big loss in South Florida growers also. The other difference between us here in Central Florida and South Florida is a lot of the structures there are simply, shade houses.
Right. Or wood construction.
Right. Now there are businesses there that are getting a little more sturdy, but typically those were shade house operations.
Yeah.
And I mean, even a typical summer afternoon thunderstorm, will
can do some damage.
rip shade cloth off the building.
Sure.
So you can just imagine, 100+ mile an hour winds coming through there. So you've got structure damage, you've got crop loss, and
because if you have a plant that's supposed to be growing in shade, and the shade cloth is facilitating that, and this is something people ask me a long time ago. We somehow got on a live stream about hurricanes, and they asked like, well, what's your, do you evacuate? And I'm like, no, I don't. Because if you do lose roofs, you either got to figure out how to get plants. A piece of poly back up there to at least just help, or, to start moving plants, and you need to be there to do it, ASAP. But that is true that Hurricane Irma did slow down the whole industry, because we felt that too. And that honestly is a decent amount of the Gabriella plants starting of the story, because that was in September of 2017. It was the same month I got married to my wife. I was actually made homeless by that storm. Wow. Greenhouses only lost 2 roofs out of the 15, but we took on water through the roof I was renting at the time. And good thing I didn't go to bed. I'll show you the picture afterwards, Madge.
Yeah, lost most of the roof.
I have to watch what I say to her. I don't want to I'm freaking her out. She's going to be scared. But
I mean, we did the same thing. We lost roofs only.
Which is best case for a grower in Central Florida.
But the next day, I'm telling you, those wonderful folks that work with us, I mean, those girls were out there with the rakes, with the buckets. The plants that lost their roof overhead, they immediately had them loaded up on carts and transported to the next building over that did have their roof, had all of the drip tubes picked up. All the plants that were blown all over the place were already picked up in trash buckets, out there with their rakes, and within a couple of hours, it looked like nothing happened except there was bright skies overhead.
Right.
They were amazing.
So what do you, so you say that, like, obviously I'm agreeing with that. That's a cool perspective on the hurricane thing. How else do you think the market has changed in the past 2 years? That being the start of enough growers being hurt,
Right.
that the supply, the ability to grow more plants, like Madge said, some can take, a year or more. A lot of that got sidetracked. And even if you didn't have, you as a grower didn't have significant damage, that doesn't mean the other business that you purchase cuttings from, or that gives you liners or baby plants to start with, that they didn't suffer a damage, or anywhere in between, right? I mean, there can sometimes, even after a hurricane, just be that you can't get soil because it's hard to get 18 wheelers down here and have access to all the roads right away.
Right, and that's exactly, where we currently are, is still remnants of that, because it just all snowballs from there.
And then the big pickup with COVID too, because people started purchasing more house plants, but that was far after the
that was
actual
a year over, or a year after Irma. That was the second part of the storm. So you're already dealing with the shortages left over from Irma, trying to keep up. And then along comes COVID, the shutdown. I like to use it as, a repeat of September 11th. It was a shock, drastically. I mean, COVID-19 will never, ever compare to that, but that same initial shock.
and the whole country being whole country being affected, which I think is a big thing.
Conversation.
Right.
Yeah,
just like that. Oh my gosh. Yeah. My life is in disturbance.
Right.
Yeah.
I got up. I used to go to work every day. I did my job. I come home. We have dinner. We go out with our friends. We go to a concert. We go to the beach. We go here. We go here. All of a sudden, no. You're home. If you're fortunate enough that you have a job where you can work from home, okay, you can still do your job.
Sorta.
Sorta. But your life was just completely turned upside down. And it's that same feeling of I can't control COVID. I can't control what's going on around me, but I can control what's going on in my home. And if I'm going to have to be here, dear, I think we need some new furniture. I think it's time to redo that bathroom. Well, you know what? Now the kids are home because there's no school in some places.
Right.
What are we going to do? We need to keep the kids busy.
Right.
You know what? Let's start gardening. I can teach them how to do that. Hey, let's go down to wherever your favorite place is. Hopefully, Gabriella, please. And let's go get some clay pots and let's show the kids how to pot this stuff. I can control this, right? I'm in control of this portion of my life. And the brand new love affair was started again.
It's funny because you're like, it seems like you're describing Shane's first potting video you made. We had the exact same conversation where he's like, people are at home, they looking for stuff to do with their kids. Let me make a quick video to, if I can get people into a quick propagating video just to have something to hold on to, Yeah,
especially because people ask us, how do we propagate in the soil compared to with water and stuff? And I was like, yeah, this is probably true.
It's a perfect time for this.
I always tell the joke, but yeah, I felt like house plants were also, when it comes to COVID specifically, we're also like not last choice, but like second choice, because everyone went through, like you were saying, first you got all the projects, the new living room couch, you got that, and then your desk in your home office was not the best, so you got that fixed. Then you got over to the round up the driveway, and then Lowe's had a shortage of mulch because everyone decided to go mulch their lawn at the same time.
The ceiling has been vacuumed and all the baseboards have been wiped down. All your projects are done.
Exactly, and houses and the house plants and giving people something to take care of, some ownership, some responsibility day to day.
Right. And it's that one little piece that they have control over. And it's not just, to occupy your time. I don't think people understand the extreme importance and value that there are in plants for your mental health.
Mm-hmm.
We've been bombarded daily by, the medical portions of COVID, but I think we've overlooked our mental health.
Mm-hmm.
And that is just as important as your physical health. It really is. And when you get up in the morning, you know that you have this beautiful little collection of plants that are depending on you to keep them going. And it's the whole mental health
it gets
thing.
you out of bed.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It gets you out of bed again. And,
They are stress reducers. They're oxygen producers.
Right.
It's back to that feeling of peace you're talking about when you first step into the greenhouse or at the end of the day when everybody's gone and you can just be out there with the plants. You feel all that anxiety melt away.
And if the plants are the only thing, like kind of what I was saying earlier, like if the other thing you see people doing is waking up, and even if their plant doesn't need anything, doesn't need to be watered, it's, well, last night when I went to bed, it sure looked like that was unfurling a new leaf.
Right.
And it's that one little, even just, again, plants being kind of a vessel to display growth in people's life, even when you are locked home, even when you are, cut off from a lot of the other social aspects of what gives you affirmation as a human. That even if your plant doesn't need anything, it producing that leaf is like, it's happy enough that it's working on a new leaf, know, and that's a sense of like accomplishment for somebody as well.
Oh yeah.
And I think that's really important. Madge, I don't want to keep you all day. We could do this for
I literally could be here all day.
I know.
We'll have to do a part 2.
You and I could both be here until our internal patience runs out and we need soil, and then we'd just be sitting here with like a bucket of soil on our laps, like just playing with it to make ourselves feel at home. So in the last couple of years, you've been able to, I don't want to say switch up what you're doing because you're still growing a lot of what you grew before, but you got to start offering and start working on newer plants. What's obviously other people can't go and purchase directly from you guys, but what is something that Madge is passionate about figuring out right now? What are you working on propagating? What are you working on that maybe would be interesting?
I would say probably one of my personal favorite projects is bringing back to life an old classic. The golden pothos.
Yes.
Oh, yawn. Golden pothos. My grandma had that plant. What's so special about that? Well, for me, over the decades now, is being able to observe the changes in your average golden pothos. Like over the last couple of decades, the fact that golden pothos is hard to discern from jade pothos.
Yeah.
It's been
the stabilization of the variegation.
Right. It's been overproduced to the point where it's lost its luster.
Yeah, it's not nearly as magical as it once was.
Right. And my husband and I were fortunate enough to run across lovely area that we noticed some very loud bright yellow that first caught your attention from off in the distance. And just walking up on it and realizing, oh my gosh, I haven't seen this in the last 30 years.
Yeah. Even Marble Queen in that sense has gone down in its variegation overall. And that is something I think we could do a whole podcast on how it is to maintain stock plants and parent plants. I mean, a lot of nurseries rely on the same parent plants to produce not just an entire batch, but I mean, generation on generation, batch on batch. And a lot of these greenhouses, you have to rely on your self-sufficient cuttings, which maybe in a year doesn't degrade very much. But yeah, when you're 20 years later and the entire species has been very over-cultivated to the point where that variegation has really lost its luster, it's going to take finding ones with good variegation and bringing those back out to really get that wow factor back.
Right.
Yeah. What is your favorite plant you're growing right now?
Oh boy. That's a really hard one. It's to me, it's like asking which one is your favorite child.
Right.
No, they all are. It's really hard to say, which one is your favorite. The one, I guess that right now we're having the most fun with is the Hoya. That one has really taken off well. It's always amazing to find out that there are thousands of varieties, different shapes, different colors, different colored flowers, different growing habits. One of the funnier stories that I can recall with the Hoya is scaring myself something terrible one morning. We went in to go pull an order, and it was for a bunch of hanging baskets. And I thought that I had walked up on a nest of hornets. It really scared me half to death. Stop dead in your tracks.
Right.
Don't move. And while I was standing there, I noticed that the wasps weren't moving. They were just kind of hovering, and got a little bit closer only to discover that I had walked up on a nest of baby hummingbirds.
Whoa.
They had their little faces buried in those blooms.
Right.
But when you first walk up on them, all you hear is that little initial humming, buzzing sound.
Right.
And obviously, anything in the air, oh my God. That
Yeah,
must
well,
be
Floridians
wasp or
just know you
something.
run the other way from a wasp.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But and I had no idea that those blooming Hoyas were such a little hummingbird magnet. And from that point on, I've just been completely infatuated with that plant.
Right.
They are so interesting to watch them grow.
Yeah, and I think that it's cool that in a lot of species you have, if you get into Anthurium, they all basically like the same thing. And Hoyas, they do all like the same thing. But like you were saying, different colors, different shapes. I mean, they all still have the same preference, but even the amount that they want to be watered changes by the species, the amount of the rate at which they produce new growth. That was one thing that took me a long time to learn on Hoyas. I was like, well, what's wrong with this other Hoya? I have 30 of this and 30 of this, and this one's 2 foot tall.
Right.
And this hasn't even started producing a new leaf yet.
And I remember that was one of our very first conversations that you and I had when we first started with the Hoyas is, customers were coming back and they were like, oh my gosh, what's wrong with this Hoya? When I first got it, it was dry. But it was so beautiful and it had lots of colors. And, I don't know what I'm doing wrong. It's just dying. I love this plant. I water it every day. I take care of it. It's like, well, mistake number one. You're watering it every day. You need to stop that.
In a pot that doesn't drain either.
Right.
So
Exactly.
Got no drainage.
Exactly. And you just need to what I tell my customers is you need to remember that a Hoya is like a cactus's cousin. Cactuses don't like to be overwatered either. So,
but in the same way, you can't just say, okay, then, well, once a month and stop listening either.
Yeah.
Because you can also, miss watering these things. And I think that there's a tendency to overwater, and I think there's a tendency to underwater.
Right.
And the important thing you learn over time is that every plant has the happy medium. It may be somewhere different in between, but no plant can survive off no water.
Right.
And unless you're in the aquatic lily pad, category, none of them
Survive underwater.
Yeah, none of them can go swimming for 6 months at a time and love it either. So each plant is just a matter of where it falls in the scale between those two realities, and which is impacted, again, not to go to the top of the show, but by where you live, by how many overcast days you have. The sun, even if you're inside your house temperature is 68, if you're not, most of the plants shouldn't be in full sun at all. But if you're in a very sunny spot, that soil's going to evaporate. The soil's going to heat up a lot quicker, even if your ambient temperature in your house is relatively cool. All those things, make it individualized. But we would be remiss, Madge, before we let you go, and thank you so much for being on the podcast. But
my pleasure.
Two questions, uncomfortable questions that we asked every plant guest. And it, again, like I said earlier, the two questions is, one, what's your least favorite plant? Or the thing you're finding in the terms of asking that to a grower. I think the better question is, what is the plant that you learned the most from, or was the most challenging
challenges right now
in growing?
Right.
Which obviously maybe that's a problem we just have because we're bad at growing plants, and she's got the experience on it.
Everyone goes through that, and that's the one thing I encourage you. And I know your listeners may say, "Is she crazy?" No, make as many mistakes as you can.
Oh yeah.
Those are always the best teachers. Well, I tried this and it didn't work, so let's try something new. We've all done it. One of our biggest mistakes was trying to grow a plant that should not have been attempted to be grown in Central Florida. It's hot. It's
what plant was
humid.
that?
One time we tried to grow carnations.
Carnations.
Right.
Now, how long? Those have a blooming season, right?
They do, but they don't like summer and August here. Found that out, and they also are not real big fond of our extremely high humidity.
Some discovery learning.
So yes, welcome to Botrytis 101, students.
Right, and airflow is a big thing, and it's important that people know that all of us make mistakes, regardless of if we're starting out. You're going to make those mistakes.
If they're lessons, they're not mistakes.
Exactly.
You can learn something.
And as long as you're always growing more, I mean, in my mind, that that's the goal. Is as long as you're still approaching it. The time where it starts to turn into something that's counterproductive and counterintuitive is when it starts to add more stress and add more to your life that it shouldn't be. But as long as you can keep the perspective of the lesson learned as a way to grow, it's a beautiful way to live life.
Oh yeah.
And with your friends, with everywhere else, if you leave those situations, that failure, whatever it was, and your first kind of internal thought isn't, well, screw that guy, or whatever, and you get just immediately into the negative headspace. If you can instead go, okay, well, what could I have said better?
It's the freedom to make those mistakes, allowing yourself that freedom.
And then remember, too, now the next time as you continue to grow, which I know you will in the future, when you add your next grower, that's the one next lesson. When you know that you're heading into that super hot time of year, hey, we need to spread these out a little further. We need to make sure that there's plenty of airflow. And you know what? How about let's back off on that watering? If we can hold it off another day or two, let's do that. And guess what? You just avoided your next problem.
And pass that knowledge off to the next person.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much today, Madge, for coming in and for being on the podcast.
You are most welcome. It was a joy to be with you and to meet you, Sam.
Absolutely.
And I hope we get to do this again.
Oh yeah, we'll definitely do it. And we gotta get Zach in here next time.
Yes.
On we gotta do some show and tell of something.
Yes, that would be awesome.
We'll figure out how to do a show and tell with Madge, because that would be a lot of fun.
Yeah, like I said, we'll have to do a part 2.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you guys for listening to the Every Plant Story podcast. You can find more about the podcast and the show notes by going to the Every Plant Story website, everyplantstory.com. You can also follow us on Instagram at Every Plant Story, and we will see you guys next week in the next episode.